All right, hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, January 16th, and we were starting out week 3 of the class, and we're going to get started on this session the way we did last week with a bit of peer review. We have 2 submissions from the Angry Bots composition from last week, and we will take a listen to those. And then we will switch over to talking about the topics of the assignments for this week. So upcoming, we are going to be taking the music and the sound effects that you have created, both from week 1 with 2D Platformer and from week 2 now with Angry Bots. And we are going to use the software called Wise to implement your audio into the game. We will take the WAV files and set them up in a particular way in this software so that your music and audio plays back correctly the next time you try out the game. So that will bring up a whole bunch of new ideas and maybe issues that you might encounter with how the music and your sound plays back. And so we'll talk about all sorts of different approaches and techniques to get that working and then to fix any troubles that you might encounter. So let's go ahead and discuss the compositions here for these 2 submissions that we have for Angry Bots. Talk about the overall approach to how the music is set up and works, and then we will kind of give a discussion about how the kind of the things that we're listening for when we're grading, and then the things that you should be listening for while you have the music working in the game. Things to test, things to pay attention to with the music and the sound effects working together, and the overall functionality of the music system. So this time you would notice that I have multiple submissions on the same tracks. So instead of having each student submission on an individual track as last time, this time we have everything stacked vertically so that the tracks are going to have the opportunity to play back at the same time. And so we have the 4 main cues, which are ambient action, ambient buzzer action, mech action, and spider action. And then we have the 3 stinger files over here to the right. And as you can see, both of these are correctly formatted so that they start at the same time, they end at the same time, which means that they'll be able to loop together, which also means that they will be able to stay in sync as the loop happens over and over and over again during gameplay. I have the mixer loaded up down here, so I will play the part of the game, mixing in and out different levels. We will start by listening to the ambient cue. Then one by one bring each one of these faders in and out, listening to the changes that happens when each robot would be introduced in the gameplay, or at least during the battles. And then at some point I am going to bring all 4 faders up to unity and listen to them together and make sure that it doesn't overload the output. We have to make sure while each one of these individually might make sense and might not clip or overload, the game does have the possibility of, you will always hear the ambient cue. You will often hear the ambient cue and at least one of these. But you do definitely have the opportunity for 2 of these action cues playing at any time, or all 3. You kind of have to try a little bit in the game to get all 3 of the robots on the same screen at the same time. It's a bit deeper into the game, but there certainly is a chance. And mainly, in the game, all the audio will, or the music specifically, will have the capability of doing is fading all the way out to negative infinity or silence, and fading up to unity. You do have control over the final value or final level that the music ends up, but you're probably best served if your music, if you could bring all 4 faders up to unity and have the perfect mix that you intend to have in the game. You are going to get much better control over faders and metering and mixing and leveling inside of Logic and bouncing out the final files that you want versus doing it in Wise. You can, and I would kind of think of it as final trims of bringing levels, overall master levels, kind of up or down slightly. But for the most part, you are going to want to compose and mix and bounce all of your files at the correct levels when you bounce them out of your session. Okay, so talking about overall what we are listening for, what we're paying attention to, what you should watch out for in your own submission. Again, all 4 of these have the chance of playing back together. So one of the biggest issues that can occur is clashing notes, clashing rhythms, dissonance, basically pitch or rhythms that do not fit against each other whenever playing these in any sort of combination. All 4 of these cues should follow a fundamental tempo, time signature, rhythm, or I guess pacing, and progression. If there's it's a foundational progression, chord progression that is moving, all 4 of them have to follow it in some form or fashion. You want to make sure that each one of them has unique instrumentation, so that if any instruments are repeated, they will get doubled up or tripled or quadrupled, depending on how often they occur in multiple different cues. The game is going to combine them and mix it all for you, so you want to make sure that the instrumentation in each cue is unique according to that particular action cue or ambient cue or whatever the particular situation is. So you want to make sure that no instrumentation is repeated, so that the volumes and the doubling up of levels doesn't kind of overload the whole mix. Sometimes you'll hear a bass line that occurs in multiple cues, or sometimes it's a kick drum, and then you bring up all 4 of the tracks together and you hear 4 simultaneous kick drums. So this overpowers the mix, and certainly not the approach you want to go for. So compositionally, everything needs to follow a similar rhythm, a similar progression. You need to have unique instrumentation in each one of them. And another thing that we're really listening for is the difference in intensity between ambient and action. So we need to make sure that ambient's always going to be playing, and whenever we bring up a particular buzzer action, mech action, or spider action, that it really increases the intensity level. There's more percussion, there's more instrumentation, there's just more energy happening. So we want to make sure that each one of the action cues probably is going to include a bit of percussion or maybe a lot of percussion. So that often brings up that energy level. Maybe it's going to have a fast ostinato or arpeggiator or some sort of melodic line, a rhythmic harmonic element that comes in, and or a bass line that starts pounding away. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that each action cue brings that level of intensity up. And then once we hear all 4 of them together, that all four of them does not fall apart in its rhythm or its kind of form as they start working together. So it really is a balance between the two, and certainly why it is our second composition of the month, because there's certainly a lot of moving parts here with each one of these. So ambient cue, we want to make sure that there's some development and change over the course of the cue. A lot of times you'll have really cool sounds and instrumentation, and once it's set in the beginning of the cue, it doesn't change much or repeat at all. I'm sorry, it doesn't change much, and all it does is just repeat or just sit there in one idea. And then the 3 action cues need to have unique instrumentation so that they have their own thematic idea. We want to make sure that the player can sense what robot is coming after them, even if they're not paying attention or if it's off the screen or something like that. That's a lot of what we're listening for in the main cues here. I'm sure I'll point out some other things as we listen. And with the stingers, these look like they are the correct shape, where they have a strong hit or attack at the front, and they fade out to silence. These look the same way. They look good. They have some strong impact, and then they make their way before the end of the file, before getting cut off. They have actually reached silence. So all of that stuff looks like it is, at least visually, set up and ready to go. So we're going to take a listen to each one of them. Again, I'll bring up start with the ambient and go through the different action cues, and then end up listening to all 4 of them together. So let's see how this works here with the first one. Let's see. Just going to start with the volume low and bring it up. Very good. I like the delay effect. We had more of the drums. All right. So I would say one of the main things is to watch out for the instrumentation at the loop. Right, so we have kind of tom hits through this area, some long delayed phrases, and then we have the hi-hat and the drums come through in the second part. So the main thing is that when the drums are introduced, and there's a solid change through there. It builds kind of to a peak right before it loops, and there's a pretty sudden change of intensity and even the decay or the tail of some of the instruments as it loops back. There's also a lot more stereo kind of feel through here that switches suddenly to mono as it loops back. So the main thing I'm hearing is that, let's see if I can visualize this. Oops, that was not it at all. Well, hopefully it didn't go into the other one. Is to actually, see if I can do this without messing up the other one. I don't know. something like this, where you have the first idea in the kind of the first quarter of the cue, and then it goes into more drums, and I would kind of subtly build more drums into this section. And it builds up to a peak, but it needs to fall back down, and even this is very well. Of course, it didn't move correctly. Even where it is placed here is a sudden change, right? If this were to repeat. So I would bring it back down. Basically, anything that is added to the mix should retreat from the mix at some point. And that probably shouldn't be where the file loops. So build into your changes here and then return back from them. So where the file is actually looping is at the kind of the lowest part of the instrumentation and the intensity of the cue. Other than that, the ideas that you have and what you're doing and the changes through here definitely work. It's got a good vibe to start from. Okay, so the buzzer attacks. You got the bass line, this kind of synth bass in there. Small kind of, I wouldn't even say snare, but just like a little percussive hit there. All right, so maybe a little bit more. All right, okay, so we have part of that melody happens through this cue too. That works. I like that part that supports what was going on initially in the ambient. All right, yeah. Maybe somehow change up the groove established by the percussion. It does seem a bit repetitive as it goes through this cue, although it will probably be pretty kind of short, kind of in and out pretty quickly in the game, so that might not be as much of a concern. Let's go over to the spider cue. All right, I would say that this one definitely needs some more intensity. You can kind of see it just from the wave file, the height of it. It needs a bit more instrumentation, more instruments. What's happening in here? Okay, we got a bass line, got a little arpeggiator, a hi-hat. So probably, I'm thinking in both of these, having some big swells or big hits. You kind of have that here with the toms in the ambient cue, where these just the kind of interspersed moments of more intensity. Definitely need some added layers in the spider cue to bring that, because these are going to be pretty frequent and they eventually blow up. So having them kind of present a little bit more power as they come in. And then let's go to the mech. Very good. That definitely brings up a much more intense feel. A strong lead line also. Let's say, again, watch out for that loop. How sudden the change is from the end of the cue back to the beginning. And I would kind of steal some of this energy from the mech cue and add it to the buzzer. I think that the mech works in its intensity, and if the buzzer and the spider could kind of just come up about a quarter % more, or 25% more, to meet the mech in its intensity. All right, so let's go ahead and bring these 4 in together. All right, the percussion definitely helps. Yeah, when all 4 of them loop together, there's a pretty sudden change of instrumentation. Or it's not even the change of instrumentation, but it's the change of the instruments, the attack of the instruments. Everything was jamming along, everything was built up, and then it suddenly stops and you get the start over of the new attack of all the instruments again. But everything fits very well. There's good changes from one cue to the next. You could definitely hear and get a feel for which robot is coming after you, especially the mech, once that comes in. So good balance overall in those cues. Let's go ahead and listen to these stingers. So stingers, I typically talk about stingers as having 2 layers to them: a solid low-end hit, impact, drop, maybe kick drum, and a whole bunch of reverb, where you just have this large, intense attack, and then another layer that is the modulation on top, whether that is frequency-based or whether it is some distortion or delay or reverb or filter sweep or reverse, or but it often occupies a higher range, so that you are kind of using the full frequency range. It can stick out, something to kind of smack you across the face with the impact, and then the modulation kind of cuts through the mix so that you can hear what's kind of what you're supposed to. All right, let's bring this one back up. Oops. Very good. Next one. All right, these 2 sound too much like kind of sound effects explosions, especially with robots and lasers and explosions and missiles and things like that. I would be concerned that these would get kind of lost in the mix and would be mistaken for sound effects. Like I'm kind of ready at a moment's notice for one of these robots to come out to attack, and any time I hear an explosion or a gunfire or anything like that, I'm expecting a robot. And if that's not around, I would think, well, I guess these only play when a robot shows up. That could be something. Yeah, they kind of blend the line of sound effect and kind of musical impact. This one maybe could sound like a shutdown, but I don't think it sounds as directly gunshotty and an explosion like those 2. So honestly, it's really something that needs to be tested and would be played in the game and see how it works. It could be just in the context of listening to it by itself in Logic. It may not make sense, but in the game, it could certainly make sense. So, good stuff to start with. A couple different things to discuss, but overall, definitely will fit the bill for the game, and it'll give you something good to work with and get into the game, play through it a couple of times and test it out and see if any changes need to happen. All right, so for this one, looks like, again, we're ready to go. Just set the loop and we'll start here. good textures overall. I like the little bit of kind of rhythm or anticipation that is set up from the string lines. Good kind of low-end bass drone. One thing I might watch out for is whatever the little I don't know, melodic instrument, the do-do-do-do-do. It sounds kind of sampled, or one of those, when you hit it, any one key, it kind of pitches it around, because you kind of hear it pitching as it moves. So might want to watch out for that, and make sure that once you repeat the progression, or you kind of repeat your phrase, that you kind of change it up or add a new instrument layer, or have something either come in or out of the mix, a layer that fades in and fades out over time, or a change in the overall progression. Because once it plays through about 2 times, it's ready for a change. Then the buzzer action. All right, cool. So we have a great choir sound. We have the kind of the squelchy bass arpeggiated phrase, which definitely works to maintain that groove. I'd probably say a little bit more percussion. Well, all right. So there's like some tom hits or kind of drum hits in the background. Those could come up or have a little bit more present in the mix. Something that, or even a kind of a snare on the 2 and 4 or kind of maintain that pacing that's already been set up, and you can still feel it from the ambient cue, but has a little bit more energy or action to it. I think the sounds that you're using, the kind of the overall soundscape that's created, definitely works. Feels like it would work for the game quite well. Let's go to Spider. There we go. Definitely good stereo mix, or kind of stereo field of things moving around. Or I guess just kind of placed. But good intensity here, good rhythm, good instrumentation, good like the solid change from what was happening previously, so I could very much identify this robot or this particular action sequence. Alright, everything is fitting well also, kind of maintaining that same progression, that same underlying rhythm and pace. Mech. So, yep, that definitely hits the mark on intensity. Each one, I mean, you could feel like the instrumentation chosen for this, and just the overall intensity of it fits for the mech as kind of being the peak of the mountain, and having room for everything to fit together. I like the combination of brass and strings. There's some cool gating effects happening in the background. You left the big kick and snare for the mech. Let me start bringing these in together. So the spider is way more kind of synthy, techy, where the mech is more of the traditional brass and strings, and it's at a higher frequency range to cut through the mix. So yeah, I would say just a little bit of percussion to help the buzzer. And then I am not actually going to bring well, I can bring all these to Unity, but I'm not going to bring this up because while each one of these just kind of bounces up towards 0 just fine, doesn't clip, doesn't overload, when you mix all 4 of these together, and if I were to crank this all the way up, it would definitely overload the master. Right, so I had about 5 dB or so to go. So you're going to want to watch the individual bounces. If you're bouncing through a final limiter or a final, well, compressor is probably all right, but a final limiter that stops everything, and you've got everything kind of mixed loud into that. When you are working and composing, everything probably stays within 0, but then you bounce them out individually, and then they all could go up towards 0. And then once you mix the bounces back together, it's now gone past and overloading the master. So I often get around this by using subgroups, where I will take all of my ambient ambient faders, and route them all through one particular bus, and then take all of my buzzer action faders, all of those instruments, route them across bus 2, and then all the mech across bus 3, and all the spider across bus 4, and I will put no processing on the master, and have the 4 of them hopefully just sit at Unity, and then do all of my mixing, all my processing. If I need a kind of a master limiter, I'll put that before these chains and just try to keep those at Unity as much as possible, and watch those meters. Then I know that what I bounce will be correct and will mix back together just fine. So everything, it sounds great. The production quality on it works well. The quality of the instrumentation, the energy level, the kind of you have multiple layers in each cue of percussion and bass line and kind of rhythmic harmonic instrumentation, and then a cool lead line on top of that. So functionally everything works out quite well, and it will be yeah, just watch. I mean, you could honestly, this would be a case where you could take, the mix is fine, you could just take these and in Ys and just back them off like 6 dB on each one of them, and maybe that works for your mix. Or it would, the way better idea was what I described earlier, which is to do another mix pass in your Logic session and just watch the overall bounces. Then let's jump over to 3 stingers. Very cool. Has that big hit and then some movement. Kind of the tremolo gated effect on top. That definitely works. Cool. Maybe even a little bit longer. It sounded like these could, the tail could extend a little bit longer. So if all it is just the tail fading out, then you could probably extend them out just even a bit longer. So I think those will fit. Everything, these stingers, each one of these cues is very big and full frequency, and then you add in your sound design and all of that stuff. So there'll be some balancing and mixing to make sure that you make room for everything. And that would certainly be something else to point out for everybody, is that at some point you should take your sound design file on this for 2D platformer and for Angry Bots. take your sound design files and put them in your Logic or your DAW composition session. Listen to your final sound files with your final music. And you might realize that that's not actually final because one of them is like your music is way, way louder than all of your sound effects, or all of your gunshots in 2D platformer and in Angry Bots are way, way louder than all of your music. And since there's constantly gunshots in both of those games, it might mask all of your music. So you want to pay attention to what do you want louder overall in your game? Do you want your music to be louder than your sound effects, or do you want your sound effects to be louder than your music? Most games, sound effects are louder than your music, most often because they give you information about what's going on in the game. You can't be like, oh, did I do that thing? Because I didn't quite hear it over the music. But you are also music students and you are focused on your music. So maybe that should be louder in your demo. That's really up to you, but you should be aware and paying attention as to how they work together. So let's go ahead and that's lots of good things to talk about for these two submissions. Here in week 3, you have a chiptune composition, so I'm looking forward to having some submissions from that composition for next week's peer review. But right now, we're going to turn it over to the archive, which will discuss your new assignments for week 3 here. So let me know if you have any questions. If you're having any issues with Wise, we have a new document available on FSO for troubleshooting. And if you have any other issues that pop up, please contact me and we can get everything figured out. So if you have any questions, let me know. But other than that, we'll see you next time. Thanks. We're going to switch from the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016. And my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go, let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D Platformer Wise setup and AngryBots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D Platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There's a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the Wise project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. if I can spell it right, music, and I'll create another one called sound effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects, and I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch Wise and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise. And then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the soundbanks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file. Like you do in a DAW, you create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here. We are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together, and we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist, Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives, the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order, which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play it one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all three of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go up to Project here. I'm going to do Project Save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that the application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this, it maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hitted? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing, and it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist, the end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play, and we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right, so when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects. Bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. Highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine, so we're going to hit import. I'll just go to Project Save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So we're going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX enemy death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX ouch. And the last one here is SFX taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead, we are going to play a file. We can hit Browse, and this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's Enemy Death. Here's Gunshot. Browse. Gunshot. Health Pickup. Browse. Health Pickup. Jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container. Taunt. Select taunt random container. All right. Now I have messages. Seem to work. All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one Sound Bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit Generate. And when you hit Generate, this message will pop up, and it says Evaluation Mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit Generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do Show Package Contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to Apps, go to Contents. Resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In Resources, we'll go to Data. In Data, we'll go to Streaming Assets. In Streaming Assets, we will go to Audio. We'll go to Generated Sound Banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this, and you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D platformer application and the 2D platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get in contact with us, and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely Wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so this there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about a minute long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they are very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums, and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided by for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. 4. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. It depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are, there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. Well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track. And then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues, or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, 8th note, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition, and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, and other than that, have a good day. Thanks.